everybody. Hi all. Thank you for coming. Walking over here, we had hoped to be able to stay at the museum, but there were some technical issues that prevented us from staying there. And so walking over here, I'm walking over, and I felt a little bit like I did for my 16th birthday party, hoping someone would show up. Vaguely hoping someone would show up, and people are here, so that's great. I'm glad that many of you have decided to stay with us and talk about next steps in the creation of Sigler and how we can move forward. The agenda here is pretty loose. What we want to do is talk a little bit about next steps in process terms, but also actually in terms of getting down to some work and working groups. We have heard dozens of ideas over the last 2 days about what Sigler should be doing to begin. That ranged from my friend Dave Ulrich, who is he still here? Oh, and I think he had to take off. And Dave and I are going to be connecting in Chicago on Monday. But dealing with climate change, which is obviously a very ambitious agenda, to much more practical issues about harmonizing the regulatory standards around safety rules. So in that huge umbrella and net, there are many things. But as I have said on a number of occasions, publicly, but to many of you as individuals, this is an organization that is not well endowed at the moment. I come from an organization, I'm on the board of a group called Civic Action, which is a civil society-led organization in Toronto with participation from the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and government, and it's volunteer-driven. People self-select, they choose to devote their time and energy because they think that it is a value-add organization that strengthens the Toronto region. And so people choose to be involved, people drift away, but projects emerge and have some kind of permanency because people think that it is an organization and a network that makes sense for them to be involved with and adds value to the things they do on a day-to-day basis in their work. So it's obviously challenging to create that kind of civil society network around something as large as the Great Lakes-St. Lawrence region, but that's part of the impetus for this effort. And so this organization belongs to the people in this room. It belongs to the people who have expressed interest and couldn't make it to this room. And so people keep coming to me and saying, what are you doing first? What are you going to do next? We don't know. We collectively can decide what those things will be. And we've heard a lot over the past couple of days. What Laura and I are going to do is kind of animate this discussion, but at the end I'd kind of like to ask people, what is the first thing that you think Sigler should do? Like if you could have Sigler do one thing, what would it be? Think about a year out from now. If Sigler was to have achieved one thing, what would that be? And we can have that conversation as a round table. But to get this going, we've actually highlighted and a number of people who have expressed interest in starting to talk about some issue areas, some projects. Those kind of formulated in our minds as active working groups, but at the moment they're active working groups with no working group members. So again, this will have to be people who choose to be involved. Some people have volunteered to chair some of these groups. One is on security, and the Coast Guards have, and Rear Admiral Parks has said you'd like to be involved with that. One is on water levels. And the folks from Georgian Bay Forever, but also Joel from the Alliance for the Great Lakes Who Have to Leave have said they'd like to be involved with that. We have an infrastructure and planning group which is kind of amorphous at the moment, but from our perspective it's talking about a long-term plan and common planning across a variety of different platforms, whether that's transportation and infrastructure or other issues. That may be an opportunity to engage in some public engagement. And I know Lyndon is here from Skidmore Owen, and she's going to talk about a couple of things that they're looking at. Do I see Lyndon? Hopefully she will arrive. And maybe people have had to drift away, and if that's the case, too bad, but maybe I'll speak to her things. We're going to talk about energy. We had a great conversation about energy just now. Again, like so many of these things, we could have had 2 panels or 2 days on it. But Ted from Ontario Power Generation has graciously volunteered to talk about that work and what one conceivably could do. And it's not necessarily the case that we have a particular project in mind yet, but just Ted has offered to show taking some leadership and say that this is a conversation to have and what could we do. The SMEs and the chambers have been very gracious and generous with their time. I know they're organizing a meeting afterwards, but I want to make sure that they get an opportunity to talk about some of their plans here, and that connects with a lot of small business work that a number of people are doing. And within the broader umbrella of economic transformation, we have a cross-border skills component, we have a regulatory alignment component, we have a border cooperation component, we have regional tourism component. We've talked a lot about, the freshwater coast or the fresh coast, and thinking about this region differently as a coherent brand that has a great deal to offer in terms of tourism and recreation globally, and so they're marketing things. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about. I know people are going to have to drift away soon and catch flights, and we'll follow up with people afterwards and share notes and everything. But what we're really hoping for is to get a sense of what people think we should be doing now, get a sense of what some other people think we should be doing. We will take this away and get back to people, but what we're also going to be doing is really working towards the governance. Ideally, we will have someone, maybe just an acting interim executive director, to start managing this and not lose the momentum from the couple of days, to keep the momentum going over the next few months until we can get a permanent executive director, and ideally announce a first board, certainly before the summer, and get those things going. And so all of those things are in the works, and we've been working on them. Some of them we would have liked to have a little bit more in place before we got here, but some of those things didn't quite happen in time. So I'll turn it over to Laura now. If you're gonna,
sure.
You want to take it over from here?
Just for a bit. Yeah. So I have been focusing quite a bit on the economic transformation potential working group. So that's kind of where my comments are directed. But also to give you a sense, I think, of what our model going forward is for things that we would be amenable to taking on board as working group projects, whether they're in the environmental space, the economic space, the security space. What would a Sigler project look like? Well, in very broad terms, it would be something that other people are not doing, or something that we could help to magnify and expand. So if it's taking place in Quebec, New York, can we help regionalize that to Detroit, Windsor, to Buffalo, Niagara? So it has to be something that's not already being done. There is no shortage of problems, so it would have to be a problem for which there is a constituency for a solution. And that would also mean funding for work on this as well. So those are some very broad approaches to what we might do. Our advantages are working across multiple jurisdictions, being able to bridge the gaps between government and industry, between federal, provincial, state, municipal. We have shown at this conference that we are very good at bringing a lot of disparate interests together and working towards consensus, working towards some common views and beliefs. That would be another thing that our working groups would have to do. We would have to be able to achieve a consensus on what we would do moving forward. I have tasked a number of people to speak here, and some of them have traveled specifically to speak. So I, in moving forward, would like to suggest that we get our speakers to offer their perspective from their issue area in a couple of, say, 2 minutes to start with, what they think is important and what it is that Sigler, they would recommend Sigler move ahead with in the future. And I'm going to start a speakers list, and then we can add on to other folks who are here, so we don't want to lose anyone who's come with remarks and suggestions. You heard a lot from me yesterday on the borders and regs piece, so I'm not going to repeat that. Chris Smiley from AFL-CIO has offered to help us out on skills and mobility certification issues, and so he sends his regrets he couldn't stay over today, but he's very keen to lend us a hand on that. Moving ahead, we've got my friend Doug Switzer, who's president of Motor Coach Canada and Ontario Motor Coach Association, who has offered to speak on regional tourism. We've got Marcia Youth, who can't say anything officially, because she's a representative of the State Department, but she knows more than any 10 of us put together on regulatory issues, and may be able to nudge us without necessarily telling us what to do. Following this meeting, so seamless you might not even notice, the small and medium-sized enterprise group, not subject matter expert, I apologize for our 3-letter acronyms, but in this case SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprise, they're going to be holding their own working group meeting, but we've got some folks to speak specifically to SMEs here. I know Josh is one of them. Is it going to be Brett as well, or is it going to be Craig, or we'll see?
I think I'll do the 2 minutes.
You'll do the 2 minutes. On energy, we have Ted from OPG, and also Brian Hackett from Washington, from Wexford,
Yep.
who's quite knowledgeable about these issues. Okay, Ted, Brian, Eric Miller on Eric. There we go. Currently the Vice President of Competitiveness, Innovation, and many other important things at the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. And on the security issue, we have somebody from the uniform table.
My apologies, Pat Parks could not be here.
Excellent, thank you so much. And do we have somebody at water levels too?
Yeah, David.
Hi, David. Great, so does that make sense? We'll just sort of run that list, and then depending on time permitting, we'll expand a little bit. And that would make Doug Switzer, there he is. You get your first speaker, Doug.
And Lyndon has arrived from tomorrow.
And Lyndon is planning.
Sorry, did I miss my intro?
You missed it, it was great.
Do you want us to do it from where we're standing today?
I think from where you're sitting.
Where we're sitting? Sure. It's more a little more informal. Obviously, from the group travel and tourism industry, there's a lot of interest in a lot of the issues that we've talked about today. I had some good conversations last night around natural gas and using them to power motor coaches. Water levels are something we obviously care a lot about. The Great Lakes are a great resource for this area in terms of travel and tourism, and water levels and water quality are huge issues for us. But I'm just going to focus on, and since I've only got 2 minutes, which I now use 30 seconds, on sort of 2 basic issues I think that we would be most interested in this group proceeding with. The first is the borders, and we talked about that a little bit. Some of it's just infrastructure issues at the border and processing at the border, but it's not just a case of getting Canadians into the U.S. and Americans into Canada. We've become quite a destination for international travel from all over the world to come to the region, and there are some challenges in terms of getting people the appropriate documents so that groups, say, from China or Japan can fly into Toronto and go to New York and Montreal and visit the entire region, crossing the border 1, 2, or 3 times. While we're doing that, balancing out against obviously security concerns is a challenge. So the movement of people across the border, but as I say, not just Canadians and Americans, but also international visitors, facilitating that process and getting them across the border. And I guess the other issue that I would highlight, if I don't get to, is general infrastructure issues, whether it be transit systems, whether it be rail systems, airports, ports, all of those travel infrastructure items are of great interest to us in ensuring that they are upgraded and we see some improvement in the kind of travel infrastructure that we have in the region.
Quick question, why would this be a regional, what's the regional piece on here? It doesn't have to be regionally specific, but why are we in the Great Lakes interested in facilitation of travel for
It seems such an easy question. I'm trying to figure out what the real question was. Obviously, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. in traditional sectors. Travel and tourism is a major economic sector, and
yeah, I apologize for being simple-minded, but when we've been discussing this stuff with other people, they sometimes look at me and they say, well, why is that a Great Lakes issue? And so just...
Right, and in many ways, you know, as we've talked about with all of these other issues, we are an integrated economy in this region. There may be a border cutting through it, there may be provincial or state borders, there may be international borders. But the fact is that you know, travel and tourism, people cross the border on a regular basis, whether it's across the border to go to a casino in the adjacent community, or whether it's a trip to New York City, do cross the boundaries and view it as one geographic area rather than worrying terribly about the geopolitical lines that you draw on the map.
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter, John?
The country from which the largest number of people are traveling as tourists as of now is China.
And we have a food destination status. Yes, sir.
No, well, and who would be more likely, as part of a tour group doing a Great Lakes tour, to possibly run into problems crossing the border?
Absolutely.
There's your biggest market and it's growing fast.
It would seem to me very important as an organization starting up to make sure that we're occupying the space that no one else is occupying.
That's, yeah.
And so I guess my question is, what part of that is not getting done right now?
Actually, I think there are a lot of parts of that aren't getting done, and I think that one of the things that we've done in the last decade, particularly related to the border, I mean, the infrastructure pieces are always a challenge. I mean, I noticed that today the president's issued a presidential permit for the bridge in Windsor, Detroit, so that's a big step forward. So, the infrastructure issues are always going to be with us, and we're always going to be struggling to fix those. But I think there's been a lot more work done on the movement of goods across the border than there has been on movement of people, particularly in my case with motor coaches. It has very much been an afterthought in terms of the government policy and regulations and processes for getting those people across the border. And again, as we just pointed out, it's an emerging issue that we have these international travelers who are coming in. And so, again, I think that's a new task to find a way to accommodate a new reality that it's not just getting Canadians to the U.S. and Americans into Canada. We now have to think about what do you do with that group from China that wants to go to 3 or 4 different destinations on either side of the border. And that's I think, a fresh field for policy.
There's lots of hands up, but I'm just mindful of the fact that we've got an SME session starting in 8 minutes, and we have at least 8 things to talk about. So could we hold? I know we have. Could we hold questions to the end of the session, or is this a burning issue, sir?
A burning issue. This group, group travel, tourism, and probably the infrastructure group, if it's not the same group. To answer your question, why is this important to the Great Lakes? Well, I don't know about the provinces, but in the states on this side of the Great Lakes, we seem to be, we're gaining population, but we're losing population vis-a-vis the rest of the country. That's why Michigan, Ohio, New York are losing congressional seats, where other states are gaining them. We're losing influence in Congress because of that. And a lot of it has to do with our, I mean, there are reasons for it. We've got all this fresh water, we've got all this great stuff, but we don't, we probably are limited in how people are getting around. We don't have a lot of, from rail to bike trails to all the different amenities that people seem to like. We just get, federal money in dribs and drabs. We're not really getting the big amounts that we should be getting.
You're right, and it's not integrated.
So that's why it's a Great Lakes issue.
What's your name, sir?
Marty Gelfand.
Marty, thank you. All right.
I'll do 4 words.
4 words.
Branding, quality of life. I won't elaborate, but Senza's presentation yesterday where he said leveraging tourism as a way to demonstrate our incredible quality of life here as a way to also attract talent and disease.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, we got 3 words.
It's not specifically to do with the comment before, or I think it's just perhaps that guides the conversation to some degree. If Sigler is going to be unique in what it does, occupy a very different space. I think we have to define what that very different space is before we actually jump into the specific issues. Right? I mean, if Sigler is going to be going to take control of sort of the research space and the action space to some degree. Then we can start looking at problem questions that fit within those spheres. Excuse me. Undoubtedly, whatever we put up on that whiteboard will be important issues. Of course, I mean that's part of the reason why we're here. But if Sigler is going to really define a new realm of operation and have some impact, research and action are two that I came up with, or whatever it is. There has to be two very specific realms that we are able to capture our commentary in. Would be my
I think we're guided too by the words of Penware Director Matt Morrison, who says, just do something. Marta, regulatory.
Okay, this is where everybody's eyes glaze over. Regulatory cooperation is kind of a scary or a boring sounding concept, but I think Ambassador Jacobson said anybody who's heard him speak about this has heard him call it the tyranny of small differences, and that's exactly what Reg Co-op is, death by 1,000 cuts, I think you described it. And it really does work that way. We are so closely connected, and yet these things are barriers, and if we could eliminate even a small percentage of them, just in terms of ease of travel, ease of movement of goods, ease of having the same things in the same market, price differentials for Canadians, all of those things could be resolved. And in terms of what Colin was saying, are you occupying space that nobody else is occupying? Well, obviously the two sides of the Regulatory Cooperation Council are working. I mean, it is slow-going work. It is not sexy. They have had successes, but how do you market? We are now jointly looking at veterinary drugs for cats. I mean, it just doesn't make the front pages. So, but one thing that does, one of the successes of the RCC that has specifically affected the Great Lakes was they have put forward a pilot project for joint inspection of non-U.S., non-Canadian flag vessels entering the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway. So this was a very specific, Great Lakes kind of thing. So in terms of what Sigler could be doing in terms of Reg Co-op, the state of, as far as I understand, specific states aren't necessarily issuing regs and so forth. So you're not looking at that kind of Reg Co-op, but you can, in your group, identify things like that, things that specifically affect the Great Lakes and affect the economic vitality of this region. And if you could bring the stakeholders together and be the one to say, okay, we represent these 27 groups on both sides of the border, and they really say that this is one of the things that has to be resolved, and it will mean, this number of millions of dollars in terms of economic, benefit, then, then you've got a winner as something like Co-op.
Could I turn to Craig? I don't want to put you on the spot, but Craig or Josh, but probably Craig because this dovetails with the U.S. Chamber, the Canadian Chamber in Kenmore on next steps in Reg Co-op, and I know you're involved.
Sure, there's a couple of things going on. The U.S. Chamber spearheaded an effort called the Stakeholders Coordination Council, which is basically a reporting system on the Beyond the Borders or Regional Cooperation Council, and that's ongoing. And they did an event last year, and they're kind of keeping track of everything leading up to, I guess, June is supposed to be the next unveiling of a progress report. So that's one piece of it. And then Penware, as Matt mentioned, put out just in the last week, and it's a neat website. It's an idea generation website. So it's kind of like a social media where you go on and you put an idea, and then other people can vote on whether that idea should rise to the top of the priority list. We'd have to share the link for you, because I don't remember the link offhand. But
we'll check it out.
Okay, but people aren't on there right now, and it's being steered by Penmar, so there's a lot of Penmar ideas on there, but if the organizer send it out, I would recommend people look at this website, because you can really kind of, what you're saying, bring to the forefront some of the specific issues and get some momentum around them. It has a social media feel to it, but it really is the ideas are on there, are things that we've all talked about.
I think I ignored Kai last time, so.
So I mean, there's been a lot of references to pen work. And I'm just thinking in terms of sort of like defining this like space or the spaces that we're going to be moving in. It might be a good idea to actually take a look at what Penwar's done to get some idea of where the spaces are that we might want to focus. Not that we have to replicate what Penwar's done, but they've done something right. And maybe that could serve as a guiding light for us in some respects.
That's a great point. And actually, we did do an internal study, and I'd be happy to share that with you, and you can certainly share that as well. Sir, yes.
It is a good idea, I think, to have a menu of possibilities. But what we notice, and our little company does technology development based in Canada, we have been to a lot of conferences in the last 3 years of researchers or of agencies or programs. And what we notice is that the energy at the conference is wonderful. And there are some contacts that you make among yourselves, and then later on, little groups of people are going to contact one another. But it gets isolated after that. You get 2 people talking or 3 people talking, and the rest of you don't have anything to do with it. One of the things that really helped us once or twice was they put out a list of who was at the conference and how to reach them, so that you could continue the dialogue. One of the reasons that's important is that, for example, you have cooperative centers for research under the NSF, the National Science Foundation in the States, and they have industry members, and they have to meet twice a year to decide on which projects, exactly what we're doing here, which projects off the menu of possibilities they're going to vote to choose to fund from the limited funds they have. And what happens is, they get to the meeting and the industry members are tongue-tied because they haven't been willing to talk to each other in the in-between. They haven't been able to talk to each other in the in-between. Now all of a sudden they've got to make a decision. And if they haven't been in contact, what happens is they get all bashful and then they tell you a little bit of what they want and then they have to do it at the next meeting. Now, your meetings are probably going to, for this organization, going to be a little more often than twice a year. But nevertheless, I think that the more important thing is how much contact the individual members and participants and stakeholders, some of them not coming here regularly, but people in the agencies and so on, have with one another in between those sessions. Because that is going to promote better understanding of what's possible and better offers of, hey, I can do this.
And what's your name, sir?
Brad Finkelberg,
And your
Light Fantastic. In Toronto. Finkelberg.
Oh, and in the interest of inclusivity, that was Craig Turner from the Buffalo Chamber of Commerce and Kai Carmody from the University of Western Ontario Law School. Thank you. The SME guys, Josh.
Sure, I'll be very, very quick because I know I'm stressed. So I'm with the OCC. The OCC, Ontario Chambers, 60,000 members, 160 local chambers. I guess we're here and we're a part of this initiative because we truly face that at least our province faces a clutch moment. Deficit debt. The traditional sources of growth are challenged. I'll speak specifically to this notion of, I think my boss says it all the time, I think it's a bit hyperbolic, but I think there's some truth to it, that the era of high wage, low skill manufacturing, so-called wedge plant manufacturing is over, and we need organic sources of growth, and I think SMEs are certainly the source of organic growth. We do know, however, that SMEs are underrepresented in cross-border trade in the Great Lakes region relative to their peers in other regional economies. The border regulatory differences, I think, are a variable, but I would also add one more variable, and that is the information and opportunity costs associated with finding partners, understanding the regulatory differences, and so on and so forth. Not a problem for large firms who have their own sort of in-house capacity, a bigger problem for small firms. And so how do we address these issues? I think the regulatory cooperation, the regulatory harmonization, a huge part of the puzzle, but I also think lowering opportunity costs, information smaller SMEs of economies of scale and scope, I think is also vital. And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about in our working group. And I think this is where perhaps the idea of a portal. I got an email yesterday from a woman in New York who wants to export her drapes. She does drapes, these very designer drapes, and she sent me an email asking me about customs and asking me about, and I have no idea. And I'm the largest, business organization in the province, 60,000. I don't know. That's a problem. There are truly huge informational barriers, opportunity costs out there that should be solved. I think it's a perfect something like this. And I'll point to Keithio and Craig and Brent, I think might be in the room. They're also involved in this initiative, and that's just one part of it. I think we are going to talk about the regulatory side as well.
Miloš,
sorry, I'm just trying to pick up on this point about SMEs. SMEs are going to get involved. Sorry, Miloš, SMEs are going to get involved in international trade, either as part of the supply chain, one of their local customers, and then their products or services get incorporated in what goes abroad, in which case they're not concerned with the customs issues or export issues. Or they decide that if I can supply a McCain with whatever they supply a McCain in Ontario, I can also supply a Kraft or somebody else in Minnesota, in which case they need to get up off their rear ends and go there and talk to the potential customer and say, I supply widgets, services, whatever inputs that your competitor uses, you could use too. And I can do something for you that's really good. And then that's really just plain sharpening your pencil. So that's, once they've got, that's the first part. Worry about the customs and the import, because chances are most of your large customers are going to have their own logistics and supply guys who will look after that themselves. So that really shouldn't be the obstacle. You can pull your brains out spending money on a trade lawyer for, frankly, little use. Go to the market. And you guys can actually probably help them generate that kind of thing. So there are regulatory issues. I don't want to minimize that. Sure. But this is a pure, how do you get into the market? There's your local customer, or replicate that to your foreign customers.
Can I just one? Yeah. I think I agree with you wholeheartedly, and happy to take it on further. I think though the issue is that more and more there's a small firm that needs to be cultivated, and I think the model you described absolutely, but I think that assumes sort of an asymmetrical, right? That the opportunity costs are solved by one side of the transaction. What happens when you have two smaller sides? But I think we're in basic agreement.
And just to follow up on that, I did the study with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business on small business trade, and it is a barrier for small businesses when you have to have one guy who does nothing but the customs clearances 2 days a month, and you've only got 15 employees. If that guy can do it in half a day, then you've got
Sorry, just a quick comment for the SMEs. The other question I had though is not about trade and selling to another retailer who can then supply your product, but is about expansion of Canadian businesses to the U.S. side. So some years ago, Buffalo BIA approached us in Ontario to put together a package for potential SMEs who are interested in locating, actually expanding their business to the Buffalo area. So that's another cross-border issue that SMEs would be.
And you're from Buffalo, I bet.
No, I'm actually from Toronto. Oh. Sorry, it's Christine Carroll's.
The issue with the larger companies, which already have their own information sources and their own planning mechanism, is that they don't want advice from outside. And that's true whether it's about what R&D to do or what products to use from potential suppliers and so on. It's very difficult to bridge that, to break through that barrier that they believe that they know what they want. And I think what we might need to work on, especially when you're trying to convince people of something they're not used to doing, which is what this organization is about, I think, is how to get people to think outside the box they're in already. Because that's what created the obstacles we're trying to get rid of.
Yeah. I'm going to, because we do have an SME section, so I'm going to move on to our energy guy, and Ted first. Or who wants to go first? Do you want to?
Actually, we got 1 minute each.
You take as long as you want.
Oh, God.
I'll pick up the slack.
Get ready.
I used to be a media relations person, so I talk short and fast. We're Ontario Power Generation. For those who don't know us, we're Ontario's largest electricity company. And the first thing that struck me in this conversation today is when we internally talk about energy, it's very different than what many other people talk about. And obviously, the Great Lakes context is cars, it's birds, natural gas, all the infrastructure related to both those things, home use for power, for energy. There are two streams we see here that are interesting in this. One is energy conversations tend to talk about theoretical, what should we be doing next, which is great. And then the issue around that is how do you integrate that into planning, like in the electricity context, subdivision development. How do you work in your power sources so you don't get these fights like we have in Toronto currently over where do you put gas plants and how do you locate them and how many setbacks you have from wind turbines, that sort of thing. But there's also not as an interesting stream, which is how do you deal with, like it or not, you've got a very large infrastructure. Ontario Power Generation is unique. We do business on four of the Great Lakes, and we have plants in Thunder Bay and all the way down to Cornwall, so a drop of water theoretically goes through one of our plants at all stages of this travel. And the energy business in the electricity sector is the largest user of water, so we see this as an obvious fit because we are a very large user of water. So we think that how do you deal with these existing things? How do you do best practices? How do you work on social license? How do you make sure that you're having community support to actually do what you need to do to supply the product that everybody needs? And then the second one, as I said, is that future of, what is the future of energy? Is gas the best way to go? Where does electricity fit? Does it fit? And if you're going to make electricity, how do you keep it secure? Which is such a big issue for us in Ontario, where we have armed guards in our facilities that we never had before. These are all things that as the world changes, you have to face how you protect this infrastructure stuff. So these are all conversations that we think are important to have. The reason that we like Sigler is we get none of the water concept, water strategy from a communications point of view. The thing that I noticed when I did it was, and it was a bad analogy born out of desperation. There's a bunch of boats whacked all the way around the lake, and all of them had their own little piece, because we're involved in the IGC, of course, we have one of the, but none of them actually landed in the same spot or converged in the same spot. And I could see with these groups that are looking for simple messages like simple, we want swimmable, drinkable, fishable waters, that we were kind of needed to be in that spot first when they got there, because part of what we do is talk to our critics a lot, learn from them, and find out why they don't like us and what they would like us to do. And it's been a very valuable conversation, but it's helped us evolve as a company, and that's what we thought this was valuable, because we thought it was a broader scale, trying to do what we do on our own level.
Great.
Okay, I'm messing up with what you say. So I was going to talk about natural gas, but of course we just had a pretty great panel about LNG and some of the great potential in the Great Lakes region. So I'm going to talk about energy more broadly, specifically from a Washington, D.C. perspective. CGLR, Sigler, sorry, has the unique position to be able to talk about energy across the supply chain, unlike any other region of the United States. As Governor Blanchard well knows, there's a tremendous potential in the manufacturing side in places like Michigan, Ohio, to be able to create not just steel pipe for pipelines and hydraulic fracking and natural gas, but also to retrofit facilities in and around Detroit, Flint, Michigan, other areas in the Great Lakes region to produce wind turbines, solar panels, other advanced manufacturing. On the policy side, that gives the unique position of wanting to put forward intelligent legislation and a great regulatory regime coming out of Washington in particular, which seems to always have an issue there, that promotes the ability of businesses in the region to be able to produce these goods and services, and then as we've talked about, I think, look at the impacts both from a environmental sustainability perspective, but also an economic sustainability perspective, which leads to jobs, which I think Julie Dill specifically pointed out. So again, energy is kind of in a unique position. The challenge, which I think was one of the questions that was posed to us when we were to talk, is how do we effectively postulate what we want to do within the region for the impacted businesses, whether they be SMEs or larger companies. And I think two things come to mind, and not to hit Governor Blanchard again, but he and I have a common friend, Ambassador Paul Fraser, who consistently says that unless you're at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And it's a very true statement, particularly when you look at policy from a Washington perspective. So I think that's one of the things, the kind of the focus that we should have, if you will, as we kind of look ahead as to how Sigler can be most effective. The other is this, and all love to my Canadian friends here, and I do have lots of love for Canadian folks.
What?
But the issue, in particularly in Washington, is that when folks from Canada come down, they automatically think that here we are, everybody should notice us, we're here, right? The problem is that Canadians are, for the most part, without a professional organization like Sigler and a great acting executive director or somebody like that, to be able to position them properly, they become invisible and inaudible. And I think that is something that we as a group need to tackle, whether it's energy or whether it's infrastructure, regulatory cooperation, issues on infrastructure and cross-border trade. So just some kind of general thoughts, because they stole my thunder on the, I had a really great presentation on natural gas. It was awesome. But in any event, those are kind of my thoughts, and I'm welcome to discuss those thoughts with anybody that has any.
Can I interrupt here just for a second, because I just want to make sure we've talked about it a couple times, but I don't think I've said it this morning. I mean, the vision of Sigler is that Mowat and Koosley have been working to create a new organization. We are going to shepherd it and steward it and pass it off. I personally have no interest in be involved in an ongoing way, just like everyone else here, and try and shape the organization. But just because a couple of people have asked, so just that's not in any way part of the agenda. And I did want to actually kind of ask the question on energy. What is the one thing? Because we've been struggling, because there's some areas where we have a clear idea of a project, and some of those will become clear. What is the one thing that the one value add that Sigler could do in kind of the next year? I don't know if that's what you wanted to engage.
No, I was going to actually foot stomp what he had to say. And my name's Andy Sugimoto. I'm with the Coast Guard, obviously. But what I see Sigler and the value proposition here is that when you look at everybody's problems or the issues that govern everybody, and then you look at the amount of experts and significant individuals and people with influence and all the different things in this particular room that were brought together, that is the value proposition. That's how you're going to get to that next step. You're going to overcome the differences. You know that somebody's got a regulatory issue, you're going to talk about that. If you're going to talk about enforcement or security, which is always going to be an issue in any one of these things, you're going to have to talk to somebody that. When you bring these all together in a forum like this and then be able to speak for a region on behalf of those things, that's when things will be heard. And when you have already addressed those particular subjects, whether it's security, whether it is regulatory concerns that have already been addressed in the region, other things are that much further ahead when it comes to being heard, and then all of a sudden you do become audible in the area.
Thank you. And the organization is about change. It's about not just talking, but doing things. And I love the statement, unless you are at the table, you're on the menu. Quick point, and then we'll move on to the last group.
As somebody said, this is always a moment of great hope when you're launching something. My concern is if you don't map out for others how people can come and participate with you and get inside the tent, you have to articulate the tent and help others. Otherwise, they're going to start feeling excluded. We didn't hear about the meeting. We didn't get to go. Now,
one recommendation. How do we do this?
Well, I think the birthing people have to do some formative work, because there's all this energy that will take off in any direction. But if there isn't some articulation about what you're not doing and what you are doing, then we'll get a lot of action and people start getting excluded.
Quick point from the lady behind you.
Maybe this comment I'm going to make it looks very odd, strange, or ridiculous to most of you, because you're dealing with policies, law, which is extremely out of my mind. When I see it as a mathematician, or the person who does, the other people who does actuaries, they build model. They look at different factors and they build modeling. And after they go to build piece by piece, model by model, and to see what it conflicts and how they can solve the issues or how they go to deal with each module. And if you look at it, for example, these days with pharmacy, you go and get prescribed one medication. Your doctor doesn't really know how complex one medication with another one. But in pharmacy, there is a program which pharmacists enter which medication you're getting, and the other one, and the other doctor prescribed, and sees, the program. It tells you what the conflicts are, what you have to do or not to take it. I can see that model may be considered in this situation, like to give the model, basic model, what you're working, and as you, just like divided each module. This gentleman, for example, said there is a cross-border regulatory for grapes or anything, but they don't know that much. How about you guys get some team of the programmers or the mathematician or actuaries to get information data from you and to look at what the regulation is, what the law is, and to put those data in for each specific area, and to program with the other area connected. As soon as there is a conflict, it gives you an answer, and after you exit, and it makes it very, very easy for the people who don't know that much, like you as a lawyer or as a regular policies, and they have to chase everywhere. And after they get exhausted and they don't really know. Even you go to lawyers, or I went to FedDev and I see they don't even know one hand, the other hand.
That's the point. Yeah, thank you. I think that takes us into our infrastructure planning, right? So we're looking for Linda.
Linda, I think you're going to talk about your project.
Absolutely.
And you can have more than 4 words this time.
Okay, great. Sorry, I have a few more words than 4. My name is Lyndon Valvicenti. I'm here representing Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, a international architecture and city design firm headquartered in Chicago. From SOM's perspective, we heartily agree that there is a critical and to date missing role to play in bringing the long-term high-level vision and voice to ensure prosperity and sustainability in this region. Since 2009, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill has been involved in a pro bono effort to present and propose a 100-year vision for the future of the Great Lakes. This vision is organized around 8 kind of game-changing principles to guide decision-making over the 21st century. And these principles include things like establishing a binational park system as a way to create a regional brand or identity and instill a new sense of stewardship and quality of life. Another principle, for example, is to achieve mobility both by connecting urban centers with a new high-speed rail network and within cities to upgrade and create robust public and active transportation networks. Another principle of ours is to rethink and rebuild a regional food system with efficient distribution networks, strong brands, and sustainable agricultural practices. So it's essentially an exercise in backcasting where we're imagining, sort of playing that plannerly designer role of what the perfect future is in 100 years from today, and identifying the steps needed to get there. So it's kind of turning the conversation of natural gas on its head a little bit and saying, okay, we realize that's the next kind of transitional energy source, but where are we headed beyond that? And how do we focus on that 100-year or further long-term goal and work backwards? In any case, today the vision of SOMs is, we've presented it widely, it's received a lot of planning awards within our industry. However, it's still just a vision, and I think there's a potential role for us to collaborate on imagining a comprehensive plan for an energy network, a transportation network, and as you were saying, sort of seeing how they all fit together, not treating them in silos anymore, but as an ecosystem. So I have cards, and happy to talk further about this.
Do you want to talk about the other thing as well? This is the opportunity.
Yes. Sorry, I have a lot of my sleeves stuff, but I'm also here representing an effort led by the Chicago Architecture Foundation, which is the country's largest organization dedicated to broad public awareness around our built world. And the Chicago Architecture Foundation is planning a Great Lakes, Great Cities exhibition in 2014. Working with partners across the basin to engage the public in conversations about the role of cities in imagining, or in creating and realizing a prosperous and sustainable future. And I think there was some conversation yesterday about engaging the public and the need to have an upswell of public involvement, or groundswell, I guess. But this is an opportunity for us to have a sort of set place, a set time to really engage the public in perhaps this effort and our own individual efforts. So feel free to talk to me about that.
Thank you. We're going to have to crowd ahead, and I'm going to ask the next 4 speakers to speak, and then if we have time before the SME section, we'll take questions and comments. But I do want to make sure that we hear from Eric and David and General McDaniels and our boys in blue. Sorry about that. Eric Miller?
Yeah, so I think that this organization, in order to succeed, has to focus on what are a handful of practical early deliverables. When you're trying to start an organization, you have to do something credible, something practical, something measurable. I think it would be helpful if somebody representing the organization Mackinac Island and said, governors, are you aware of this, and this is what we're trying to do. So if you want to have that peignoir sustaining kind of foundation, you have to get early on the radar screen of those who have decision-making authority in the region. And I think what you should do is try to find a project or a couple of projects that, as I said, are specific and measurable and are also focused on the priorities of those political leaders. And so one of the things that you're looking at is manufacturing. And one idea that for example, Ray Tanguay, the CEO of Toyota Canada, has come out with is some sort of cooperation, memorandum of understanding, mutual assistance agreement between the states on the Great Lakes and Ontario when there is a situation of a global mandate that may go either to a Great Lakes jurisdiction or to jurisdiction, say, in Mexico or the southern United States. Obviously, if the plant is in Michigan, Ontario suppliers will get a lot more work out of it than if the plant is in Alabama. And so to look at ways of trying to treat the integrated supply chain as an integrated economic zone. So to take the economic reality and put some institutional meat around it. Now you can talk about how to do that and what the arrangements are, but something that captures people's imagination, gets them excited, and have governors say, you know what, I do see value in working across the border with Ontario on this.
Thank you. I'm going to take it to David, please.
We have one other aspect.
Sorry.
We have had,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think,
I waved in the same direction.
to echo the early deliverable, I think there's some pragmatic elements today, and we heard in virtually every panel, water levels or issues around water quantity be raised. Our focus right now is to actually start to look at the economic impacts of the current and expected declining water levels due to climate change impacts. So this actually, a proposal to do an economic impact study of low water levels would actually be a first entry into examining the impacts of climate change. And I think that kind of speaks to a broader theme that was presented that Sigler could start to look at. But certainly, the context of that study is not individual components. It's the entire region and all of the stakeholders that could be affected by it in direct ways or indirect ways. And I think that the beauty of Sigler as an organization is that we have the ability to approach all of those broad stakeholder groups, government, public, private, and NGO, and actually coalesce that information centrally and then be able to report it out through Sigler to all of the constituent organizations, because it's that two-way flow of information I think that Sigler has great value in bringing forward. It's a very pragmatic thing to do. The concept behind this study is we would look to initiate it in May through proper scoping, and then have it delivered by November. So this is a steerage study, not an exhaustive academic treatise. But it would be something then in a very timely way right now, because we have the IJC about to come out with advice to governments on water levels, climate change impacts in the Upper Great Lakes. We have governments that will then go off and take that advice and debate what should be done and what kind of solutions are available, of which some are proposed in the study but not yet fully costed. This piece of information, the economic impact, is recognized as being significant, but it is wholly missing just due to scoping and budget constraints in the previous studies. It's a piece that's totally unavailable. There are components of it that are available through different stakeholder groups, but the assemblage of that data and pulling any new pieces together hasn't been done yet. So it might be.
And can you repeat for us your organization is?
Sorry, I'm David Sweeter. Georgian Bay Forever is our the group.
Georgian Bay Forever, thank you. That's a great study. I'm going to move to the security piece, and General Dennison, if you could just introduce yourself briefly, because you're not wearing a uniform. And
I'm not, no, I'm in civilian clothes. The reason is I'm an alumni many years ago, 31 years ago, of this law school, so I thought it'd be better to come back in the suit. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm also on David's advisory board as well. Brigadier General Mike McDaniel with Michigan National Guard. I'm also chair of the Great Lakes Hazard Coalition. The Great Lakes Hazard Coalition is a voluntary association. We have about 80 member organizations. Most of them are in the public sector. And when I say 80 organizations, it doesn't sound like many perhaps, but we count the state of Michigan as one agency, and we've got 8 different departments within the state of Michigan. We have about 7 in the state of Illinois. New York has the fewest with 3 different departments. Our interest is in being, if you will, that sort of as part of the security subset to this organization, because as I read this, it may not be exactly like Penwar because we don't have the public official participation as yet. But we need to have that security piece. To have that security piece, which is important for our economy, we've got to be able to have those security officials. So I brought this up at our last meeting. As I said, I was chair. We've got our next biannual meeting in May, as I said to David Koch, and I want to take back how we can work together and even more than work together collaboratively, sort of plug in as part of the security group here. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is while we may not have that Penwar structure, there is still a need, as it says in great publication, sir. Appreciate it. It says leadership, knowledge sharing, and advocacy. The advocacy gap, I think, is one that cannot be underestimated. For example, the Office of Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security has these regional coalitions of critical infrastructure groups, of which Great Lakes Hazard Coalition is one. FEMA at Department of Homeland Security has these emergency management assistance compacts, of which they work with the State Department to create, to have these as cross-border. Two separate entities working within the Department of Homeland Security. It's out at the region that we have to have those merge, and merge perhaps under the banner of Sigler. Third point, our value to this organization, I think, is in showing the security pieces and where those vulnerabilities are. And of course, we do that already. That's why we have so many public sector members as well. AT&T, Caterpillar, Dow Chemical, Motorola, CMS Energy, a lot of the big big companies within the Great Lakes that are concerned about cross-border effects, those cascading effects of infrastructure failure ever since the blackout that we experienced back in 2005. And they focus, frankly, on water, they focus on pipelines, and they focus on electricity and the effects from those. And of course, the transportation is the one after that. I already talked about this then, getting to my third point, and then I'll sit down. I already talked about this with Admiral Parks, and the idea is that we could provide, because we've all got planners within our groups, we could provide a tabletop exercise. I said this to Admiral Parks, his first reaction was shut down the river and let's see what the cascading effects are, particularly looking at environmental and economic effects. And I think that is, A, the project, and B, the value that this security working group can add. And with that, I'll defer to Captain.
That's terrific. I was just saying, you can't actually shut down the river, can you? Can you like stop the flow?
Oh, no, yeah. The Coast Guard, he has the authority to shut down the river. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, General. And I just wanted to emphasize too, that ties in so well with what Marta, you from the State Department, was saying, in that the regions have to come together with proposals under the banner of what Prime Minister Harper and President Obama have already said. And what you were talking about falls squarely into the Beyond the Border initiative on movement of hazardous products and critical infrastructure, and it's incumbent on the Great Lakes to say, this is what we want, this is how we want to do it. Sir.
Andy Sugimoto again. The reason security is in a lot for the other people, it provides stability and it provides resilience. It provides stability in that you know what you're going to get, and when you meet the inspector, it's a set list of criteria. If everybody has to play by the same rules, and that's what you're going to get every single time, you can start making up your bottom line for the business individuals. It's also stewardship. It's a protection of the environments and the security of them, making sure that they remain this pristine environment that we have currently. And it's resiliency. If something does happen, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a man-made disaster, either way, the effect of these security pieces are there is to allow the fact that then there's an after. There's something to recover. There's resources coming to the area that we are going to continue to improve and clean up or do whatever is necessary for those things. So those are all part of why security is part of this. And as part regulators, part stewards, part security for the region, and our primary focus is the water, we are standing here ready to help and being part of this organization as we can. And to get back to both your points, perhaps the best way to do this as for the organization is that if you're interested in helping out and doing something with this organization, write what you can do. Write down, this is in my field, world of work, and if you have a question about whether it's cross-border customs work or something else, all of a sudden you look on the website, hey, there's a guy to talk to. Here's his phone number and here's his email address, and you're going to start to get moving that you want to get moving, whether it's low lake level or something else. But security is a cornerstone of this. It's often overlooked, and in the end it's sort of looked at askance because, oh, they're just in our way of trying to get to do what we want to do, and that's completely opposite. We have no position on that part other than maintaining the security of the region. I just wanted to emphasize that. Thanks.
Thank you. Wow, we made it almost in time. We're only 4 minutes over into the SME section. Can we just take another 2 minutes just to wrap up? Gentlemen in the far corner, maybe you'd like to give the
Sure.
benediction?
My name is Rich Felsing. I'm a regional planner, so I work in transportation, ecosystem restoration, urban planning. I think there might need to be a few regional planners. I understand there are planners within each discipline, which is good, but I think it would be helpful to everybody in everything that you've been talking about to have some regional planners. I'm not really referring to myself when I say that. It's important to be accurate and honest because there are better regional planners than I am. And if you hear from them, they will get at some of the things you're talking about. I wanted to echo what Lyndon was saying. There are designers, there are planners, and both have their role. the infrastructure needs to be expanded here a little bit. Ecosystems are infrastructure of equal standing. I think that's implicit because we're dealing with lakes. And the scale of the lakes sort of hide how important those ecosystems, those habitats are to people. Food systems is a major piece. The agricultural sector in the Great Lakes and adjacent watersheds are really a major economic driver in many ways. And there's some fantastic work being done in food systems around Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, and actually all the way to Buffalo. Samina Raja there is doing some fantastic work. Education is really a piece of infrastructure. So aligning, whether it's trade from the high school, the funding of public schools in a state like Michigan and Wisconsin right now is, open question how that's going to really play out in the future. And how that relates to both trade schools, community colleges, and the future of higher education, and how those research institutions, those 25 major research land-grant universities, how they deploy their research products, how they deploy their skills, their people, can be very, well, I think everyone is aware of how strategic that's going to be, but that's infrastructure. So if you integrate all that together, that's you've got some powerful synergies. And people are looking at that, and if you bring them to the table, they'll be able to run with it, I think. So.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call the questions here because we're into the next plenary. I just want to say thank you to our speakers, and thank you especially to those folks who traveled, especially for this. One thing, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, but while I do have my email on that address, on that board, and if you have comments, please send them to me, and I'll make sure that they get into the hopper.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear on next steps. Please get in touch with us about those questions I asked. What is the one thing you would like Sigler to be working on over the next year that you think is deliverable? And likewise, if you want to stay involved, and to echo the remarks here, let us know what you think you can do and how you would like to be involved. There's starting to be working groups formed, but my commitment to you is we're going to get out a communique that we're going to distribute by Tuesday. And we will also get back to all of you by the end of next week with the outcome of the whole 2 days and this session and some steps moving forward. So let's keep in touch. Great.
Are you going to do a post-conference survey? Maybe you could add those questions right into a survey.
That's not a bad idea. Okay. Yeah.
People walk around
Which the part they
can be converted into that. There's membership forms.
We represent the CEOs and
Oh, could you write to your company's name? I want to see your work. You know what I named you? Look at here.